I'm Francis Levy. I'm co-director of the Philoctetes Center. Ed Nersessian is the other co-director. Actually, we're really directors, aren't we now, rather than co-directors, but we like to call it because there's been a reorganization. Good afternoon and welcome to Distortions of Memory. Before we begin this afternoon's program, I'd like to make some announcements. Hypergraphica, am I pronouncing it correctly, is the title of the show you see on the wall, which was conceived in relationship to our panel, Hypergraphia and Hypographica. And this particular show, curated by Hallie Cohn, who sits right over here, will be up until November 29th. And if you go into the annex, which are the rooms across the hall, you will see further continuation of the show, along with some very interesting handouts relating to this whole subject area. We have many, many books for sale due to the nature of our panelists today. We have very many interesting books for sale. Please buy all the books. And T-shirts which have nothing to do with the panelists. I'm now pleased to introduce Lois Oppenheim. I really know Lois Oppenheim very well, but I'm going to give a formal introduction. Lois Oppenheim is Distinguished Scholar, Professor of French, and Chair of the Department of Modern Language and Literatures at Montclair State University, where she also teaches courses in psychoanalysis and the literary and visual arts. She has authored or edited 10 books and published over 70 articles, many of them extremely brilliant. That's my own editorial comment. Her most recent books include A Curious Intimacy, Art and Neuropsychoanalysis, and The Painted Word, Samuel Beckett's Dialogue with Art. Dr. Oppenheim is a member of the advisory board of the Philoctetes Center. Professor Oppenheim, or Dr. Oppenheim, will moderate this afternoon's panel and introduce the other panelists. Thank you.
Well, welcome to this afternoon's event. I'd just like to mention that I received an email yesterday from someone saying to me, how do you possibly think you're going to talk about memory on a panel in 2 hours? And actually, you know, I had been very excited about this roundtable, and then all of a sudden I thought, what can we do in 2 hours? It's true, not a lot, but we're going to try, and we have an extraordinary group of panelists here to make this happen. To the left of Francis Levy, we have Maryse Conde, otherwise known as the Grande Dame of Caribbean literature, who was born in Guadeloupe but has lived in several countries in Africa and Europe, as well as the US. She's taught in France at various campuses of the University of Paris, and in this country at a number of universities, including Harvard and Columbia, where she created and chaired the program in Francophone Studies. She's published a great many books, the best known of which are probably the two-part historical novel Ségou, Les Murailles de Terre, and I, Tituba, Black Witch of Salem. All her work, I believe, has been translated into English by Richard Philcox, and her books have been awarded several prizes, including the prestigious Prix Littéraire de la Femme and the Boucheron Prize. Sitting directly across from her is Deirdre Bair, who is the author of 4 biographies, Samuel Beckett, which won the National Book Award, Simone de Beauvoir, which was listed in the New York Times Best Books of the Year and was a finalist for the LA Times Book Prize, Anaïs Nin, New York Times Notable Books of the Year, and a BBC documentary as well, and Jung, a biography, New York Times Notable Books of the Year, LA Times Book Prize finalist, and winner of the NAAP Gradiva Award for Best Biography of the Year. Her most recent publication is Calling It Quits, Late Life Divorce and Starting Over, a cultural study published by Random House earlier this year, and she's currently writing the biography of Saul Steinberg, the New Yorker artist, cartoonist, which will be published by Doubleday. Ed Nersessian, who is sitting directly opposite me, is known to all of us as the co-director, as Francis mentioned, of the Philoctetes Center. He's a psychoanalyst in private practice and on the faculty here of the New York Psychoanalytic Institute. He is as well clinical professor of psychiatry at Weill Cornell Medical College. He's authored numerous works on psychoanalysis and was co-editor of the textbook on psychoanalysis. William Hirst, to my right, is professor of psychology at the New School for Social Research. He's previously taught at Rockefeller University, Princeton University, and Cornell Medical College. He's a leading expert on memory, especially autobiographical memory, which I'm sure we'll be talking a lot about today, and social influence on memory, and has published articles on amnesia, traumatic memory, 9/11, and collective memory. Bruno Clement, who comes to us from Paris, sitting diagonally across from me, is professor of French literature at the University of Paris 8 and was until very recently the president of the Collège International de Philosophie. He is the author of numerous books and articles on subjects as diverse as the writings of Samuel Beckett and Jean-Paul Sartre, the act of reading, and literary theory. In his most recent work, which was more specifically concerned with the interrelation of philosophy and literature, he's been focusing on the philosophical text as a literary work as opposed to a more neutral medium for the expression of thought. And so I welcome all the panelists as well as you. I'd like to actually begin this discussion of memory and memory distortion, which is the title of this roundtable, with a quote, not surprisingly, from Marcel Proust. It's a brief passage which occurs when the narrator of À la recherche du temps perdu realizes that the imagination individualizes people, as he puts it, and provides each with what he calls a legend. In the passage I'd like to cite, he's describing how the wind wrinkled the surface of the lake and large birds were perched on the great oaks, which, as he says, quote, helped me to understand how paradoxical it is to seek in reality for the pictures that are stored in one's memory, which must inevitably lose the charm that comes to them from memory itself and from their not being apprehended by the senses. The reality that I had known no longer existed. The places that we have known belong now only to the little world of space on which we map them for our own convenience. None of them was ever more than a thin slice held between the contiguous impressions that composed our life at the time. Remembrance of a particular form is but regret for a particular moment, and houses, roads, avenues are as fugitive, alas, as the years, unquote. The phrase that I find most stunning here is remembrance of a particular form is but regret for a particular moment. And this brings me to my first question, which I would address to all the panelists, which is there something inherently creative in memory? Is there something that is naturally distortive of memory? And how can we talk about memory in terms of the imagination? Anyone like to get the ball rolling on that one?
Well, I'll tell you some stories.
Okay.
Concerning Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre.
Okay.
When I was doing the research for the Beauvoir biography, every time I talked to her about her childhood, it was dark, it was gloomy, it was gray, it was ugly, it was black. And I went to the childhood apartment, which was above La Coupole, and it was the top floor, and round windows, and light flashing in from every direction. And so I went to her sister, Hélène, 2 years younger, and I said, you know, this is so strange. She's always talking about how dark and gloomy your house is, and even if you had thick, thick velvet curtains, you must have had so much light. And she took me by the hand and she said, my dear Deirdre, Simone remembers everything is dark and gloomy and tragic and sad and ugly, and you must allow her her memory. And then I went to interview Nathalie Sarraute. And she said Simone de Beauvoir was a terrible liar. She never got anything right. She couldn't be trusted. And I said, well, you must tell me the instances in which you think she's a terrible liar, because I will, need to check them out. I'll need to correct them. And she said, every time she writes something about me, it's Nathalie Sarraute in her green dress, her green hat, her green suit, and I never wear green. I hate the color. I always wear blue. And if she can't get that right, what could she possibly get right? And then one more story about Sartre. Giacometti was absolutely furious with Sartre and decided that he didn't want to be his friend anymore, because Giacometti had been in an accident that he felt had a great deal to do with the kind of work that he began to do after this accident. It was, believe it was an auto accident, if my memory serves. And it happened at a certain place in Paris, and the place was terribly important to Giacometti. And Sartre wrote about it and made it happen somewhere else. And he said, he's not allowed to do that. Those are my facts. He's not allowed to take my facts and use them for his own means. So.
That's very nice. Let me ask you, since you got the ball rolling here, how do you decide as a biographer what memories of your subject to include and what to leave out? And I mean, you've written so many extraordinary biographies of people and these life stories. How do you determine how important they are to them? How do they feel to you? And maybe you could say something about that.
Well, the first draft and the first several drafts of every biography I write is so enormous. The number of pages is so massive because I just write everything. It could be a very minor essay, and I will do a 15-page essay on this minor essay, knowing that I'm going to maybe use a paragraph at the most, a couple of sentences probably in the book, but I don't know what sentences I'm going to need or what paragraph I'm going to need. And I just write it all. I call it the 3 Ps, the passionate purple prose. And I just put it all in there. And then when I finish, I go away from it for a while and come back. And it's only at that point, after I've written everything, that I'm able to say there's a pattern here, there's a theme there. There are important aspects that I must develop on this, that, or the other thing. But you don't know that when you're dealing with material of someone else's life. You must allow it all to unfold, and then only afterward I think a biographer should begin to shape it.
Well, I'd like to address the same question to Maryse Conde, who writes of her own memories and has written her autobiography, has written much of her childhood.
Yeah, but you know, first of all, I have to say that there is something very important about me. I'm a colonized subject. So meaning that I belong to a country which is still a colony of France. And so the collective is much more important than the individual. Mm-hmm. We are trying to find a collective memory in order for our people to define itself against the French value. Don't aggressivity in that. We just know that we are different from the French, and collective, as a collective group of people, we are trying to find the way of proving that. So when you come to autobiography, like I did in Le Cœur Arrière Pleuré, you do it with a sort of guilt complex. Normally, you should not talk about yourself. You should talk about your people, about your collectivity. And if you have the audacity to talk about yourself as a person, it is a bit a treason. Normally, you should be concerned with the group and not with the individual. So, when I wrote Le Cœur Arrière, all the time I was feeling very guilty, and I had the feeling that really it was the kind of entertainment I should not indulge it in. So I cannot answer in the same way, because for me the question is almost the same.
Nevertheless, one's individual memory is always somewhat a collective memory, and a collective memory is always tied into one's... I mean, it's a question of how one constructs a sense of self, and isn't that what we do actually in the analytic situation? I mean, we're constructing a narrative, we're constructing a self through the reconstruction of our past.
Well, there is very little autobiographical that is very accurate. Most of what is autobiographical, especially from years past, has gone through a series of alterations and continues to go through a series of alterations depending on the situation where it comes up. So if you have been involved in analysis and listening to patients for a number of years, you come to the conclusion that almost everything can be understood in a different way, and when you find the distortions in it, you get to a whole set of new memories. At which point those memories are accurate, I don't know. It may be that they never are, but they seem to be more freeing in terms of the result that you get from understanding the conflict. So I think it would be very hard to write an autobiography or a biography that you would consider it to be completely an accurate representation of a person.
Maybe you could throw in something here about false memory. And
well, I mean, a variety of things that people have said raises issues in my mind. I mean, in terms of memory distortions, of course, I think you're absolutely right. Our memories are extremely unreliable. But one of the interesting things, I think, is how much our present attitude really reshapes our past. And we're really stuck in, our past is stuck in the present in some way, shape, or form. And so in experimental studies, for instance, if in one study they asked college sophomores to talk about the particular relationship they had, intimate relationship with another individual, and some people said it was good, some people said it was bad. But then they went back 6 months later, and this being college sophomores, some of them were still together, some of them were not still together. And what you found was that depending on whether you were together or not, their memory for that relationship varied to a great degree. If they were no longer together, they remembered that partner as being god-awful. I always knew he was god-awful, and I could have told, I told you that he was god-awful, but that is not, of course, what they reported. If they were still together, they remembered the relationship as their memory of it was that 6 months ago it was a quite good relationship. So I think that in some sense, when you talk about this process, it's the process that's occurring in the present, which constantly reconstructs your past to make it consistent. I mean, what kind of people would we be if we weren't somehow imprisoned by, if we were imprisoned by the past? We want the past to somehow give comfort to our present self, and I think to a great degree it does. The other question that I was thinking as you were talking about autobiographies and biographies, historians make this big distinction between history and memory, and from Nora and on. And I was sort of wondering how that plays out in the writing of the autobiography or the biography, in that to what extent is it a process of assembling memories, if you like, and a process of this sort of more scholarly endeavor of checking the facts, putting it all together. The psychoanalytic situation is not a scientific process like that at all. I assume you just accept whatever the patient says at some level. You don't go and then check it out. But
well, we have
your job is, I think, to check it out, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. I'm struck when you were talking about how the past is the present of Anais Nin, the great diarist, about whom I also read. I think besides Anais Nin, I'm the only person in history who has read every word she wrote. Because
not even her.
Because the papers are still sealed at UCLA, and I had permission to use them for my book. 3 enormous footlockers about as big as this table, I swear, plus untold boxes and shopping bags filled with her writings. And I had to learn to interpret them, to decipher them, if you will. She'd write of something that happened, and something in me would say, this is one of the red flag passages. She's going to come back to this. She hasn't told me everything about this anecdote, this event, this person. And a little later, maybe 2 or 3 years later, there would be a bit more about that earlier writing. And then finally, it could be as long as 20 to 30 years later, she'd say, it's been nagging at me all this time, and now I'm going to tell you everything that really happened. And she will then proceed to write of it as a historian would write of it. It's not her memory, her emotion, her feeling. It's at 10 o'clock in the morning on such and such a day, I met Mr. X at the coffee shop on 13th Street, and then she would proceed from there to do it. And I found that, I didn't really analyze that kind of writing in the book, but she did pretty much what
Yeah, but historians and I assume biographers have certain technical criteria they have to use in order to assess a fact.
Oh, absolutely.
Whereas when you merely remember, whether you're just a person on the street or on a couch, that those technicalities don't apply in some sense. You accept your distortions in a way that a historian is not allowed to accept.
Exactly.
Those distortions.
I have an expression that I use. You can't say it was a nice day until you check the weather report in 10 newspapers for a week before and after. Really?
Well, in some ways it doesn't matter. I want to make 2 comments. First, the psychoanalysts check their facts, but they have a special way of checking their facts, which is not like going out and checking with the family or the husband or the wife.
Which is what she would do.
But I don't know if checking the facts in that way makes them any more accurate. I would guess it doesn't. The second thing you talked about is really more to do with emotion, because it doesn't have to be college students 6 months later. You can have somebody tell you today that their wife is an angel. 3 days later they have a fight and come and say she's the worst person on earth. So that the emotion influences the whole set of memories that are remembered at that moment, as opposed to, so you don't have to wait 6 months, you can do it from day to day with anybody.
Bruno, I would.
Yes, listening everybody here, I think about Beckett. We are 3 Beckettians here at least, and I remember when Deirdre speaks, the beginning of the second part of Molloy, he says it was midnight.
Yes.
The rain. I know that in French it was rainy, and
Yeah.
the last sentence that it was not midnight. It was not raining. That's about the weather.
Yeah.
You know? But in Beckett too, in the sentence, I don't remember exactly where. I think in the Unnameable. J'ai inventé mes souvenirs. I invented my memories. And your question was, is there something creative in memories? My opinion, thinking about Beckett, Proust, the first of all, of course, is it possible that a memory would not be creative? Yeah. Not only for novelists, but I think for critics, for thinkers, for philosophers, and about autobiography, I think that all you say is absolutely exact, and we know that. We compare what you can check of the reality and what is written, and the dress was red or blue and something like that. There is a in some film by Truffaut, something like that. May I change something and put the dress is blue? Yes, you can, and you see the picture with the dress of another color. But I think that there are many ways for autobiography, and philosophy is, perhaps it's strange to say that, but philosophy is one of them. And you can speak about yourself and reconstruct your memories, seeming to speak of something absolutely different, and on creating concepts, for instance. I can't believe that. I believe that very deeply.
Can you give us an example of what you're...
Yes, but the example is not mine. If you read Derrida, for instance, a very important but very short book by Derrida, it is a kind of autobiographical text, circonfession. It's an allusion to Augustine, confession, and circoncision, the circumcision. How do you say? Suit word? No? Mot valise? Two words in one.
Suitcase.
Condensed.
Suitcase word, yeah. Okay, circonfession. Circonfession. And he says in that very important text that, in his opinion, thinking of what he wrote many years ago, probably all his concepts, for instance, the bridge, for instance, the margin, for instance, periphrase, for instance, glas, I don't know the word in English, glas, perhaps the bell, you know. All these concepts probably were to be related, to be linked to something which is absolutely impossible to say for him. A kind of memory, but not a memory, because if it was a memory, it would not be necessary to invent and to create those concepts. And the thing is, if you say one word, but the word is not sufficient by itself, is circoncision, precisely. But very difficult word to say. So the creation of this concept, of these concepts, they do something to a memory, but this memory must be reconstructed in many senses. For instance, by creating some concepts. I've tried to do some, to do if it was possible to do the same work reading other philosophers. I think it's possible. Yeah. I think it's possible. But there are many other ways because philosophers can tell their story. Descartes, for instance, is an autobiographical philosopher. He says, I was born, I was, and so on and so on. And of course, what he says is absolutely not true.
Yeah. I am wrestling with something now, and I'm going to throw it out, and I'm eager to hear what other people have to say about it, because I don't know what I'm going to say. I haven't actually started to write this. But Saul Steinberg, whom I'm writing about now, was born in Romania and was educated in Italy and came to this country and became deeply and profoundly American in everything that he did. And he swore that after he left Romania as a college student to go to Italy, that he had never been back and that he would never go back. And he told Christo and Jean-Claude, who were Bulgarian friends of his, when Christo was thinking that he would go back to Bulgaria after communism ended there, Steinberg said, you mustn't go, you mustn't go, you must hold to your memory, because it is your memory of the place that establishes and promotes and allows to flourish your creativity. If you go back, you won't have that foundation of memory and you won't be able to create. Now here's the interesting thing about Steinberg. When he was in the Navy in Italy, there's a file this thick in the National Archives of all the strings that he pulled to get himself back to Romania. And there is a collection of photos of him in the uniform of a naval lieutenant, with his family, with his friends, all over his childhood haunts in Romania. And yet he said he never went back.
It's a very interesting question, and actually I'd love to hear what Maryse has to say about it in terms of your return to places where you grew up and how this has affected.
Yeah, you know, first of all, you should not look for yourself, but I did. I looked for Maryse Conde, which is already a kind of crime in my society. So I went to other places I grew up, and you know, there is a kind of imposition of values. You are supposed to like certain parts of your country. You are supposed to be moved when you see a sugarcane field, because a sugarcane field is supposed to symbolize the suffering of your people and the suffering of your mother, because the most important Canadian book talk about mother, grandmother dying in sugarcane fields. But anyway, for me, a sugarcane field had nothing to do. So I had to look for something very personal, very individual. So for somebody like you, or born in Europe, it is easy to talk about yourself as you are. But to talk about yourself as you are, as you come from, in the Caribbean, in my society, is extremely complicated. So it is a kind of quest for a person, and you go to all sorts of experiences, hardship, complication, just to get yourself as you are.
Did you find what you were looking for?
Yes, I found myself, but it was very complex. It took me a long time. I don't know how many years, because it is only a few years ago that I wrote that autobiography. I could not have it before. I had a set idea about to be a good pen, what I should talk about, what I should feel, and to feel like Maryse Conde, talk like Maryse Conde. It was another experience.
May I ask a question?
Please, please.
Perhaps we can help you to feel less guilty. No? No. My question is that I quite understand what you say. It's very, very hard to speak about oneself and to have the care of the people as you are. But don't you think it's a real question that you can be, anyone in your position can be a kind of link between one person and the people, because people needs sometimes to have one person they admire, and it's very important to do that for you, but also for the people who needs it, because in every country, I think, there are some people, perhaps you are too modest to say yes to what I say, but I think it's very important you did that for your people, not only for you.
But you know, I left Guadeloupe forever 2 months ago. Why did I leave? Because I have feeling that looking for Maryse Conde all the time, trying to speak as Maryse Conde, to write as Maryse Conde, was not at all appreciated by the rest of the people. They looked at me with a bit of anger, resentment. So I didn't see why I have to be all the time regarded as a traitor, and I decided to leave. Among you, I feel better. I can talk about myself, and you can help me, as you say. Thank you very much.
I try.
Thank you very much.
Because the point is very important. The junction point between individual and collective memory. That's very important.
Yeah.
Well, Hallwax, who was the person I think that probably coined the term collective memory, he was a student of Durkheim's. He said that individual memories only arise. He essentially, depending on how you read him, he's complicated to read, but for some people's reading of him, there is no individual memory in some sense. We have a sense of individual memories because we have a unique intersection of many collective memories. We are Guadeloupe, we are people that taught at Columbia, and all of those various collective memories that you have, the way they intersect makes you uniquely you, but there's no individual memory to be found. The individual memories are really just the intersection of these collective memories. So the tie between individual and collective memories, from his viewpoint, is really rooted in the multitude of collective memories that we have, which then uniquely make them you, whoever you happen to be.
I think we're talking as though memory is something cognitive or memory is something state-related and affective, but we haven't really touched on the question of memory and the body, and it being it is a perceptual phenomenon as well, and how we feel in our bodies has to do with what we remember in our minds, which is, I think we can't make such a...
Well, I think we've been talking, if I could put it in cognitive terms, I think we've been talking about what cognitive psychologists would call explicit memories. Mm-hmm. That is, memories which come to mind, that are put in the footlights of consciousness, that you have, what William James would say, you have a personal belief that it occurred in your past, your personal past. They're the kinds of memories we've been talking about. Whereas I think of body memories is more what psychologists would call implicit memories. That is, memories which aren't associated with any sort of conscious recollection. And so they're really two quite different memories. There are different brain mechanisms involved in those kind of memories. They're really quite grounded in quite different psychological phenomena. And both are important. I mean, our selves are determined as much by our implicit memories as our explicit memories, I think.
Can I ask you one question? You know, I'm sorry to be so focused on Guadeloupe, but I'm from Guadeloupe. I was born there.
You're forgiven.
So, you know, there is a kind of mythology built by the French about Guadeloupe. It is supposed to be a kind of paradise, full of wonderful smell, wonderful sight, wonderful odors. Okay. But we, ourselves, Guadeloupeans, we don't see it that way. We see poverty, we see disease, and so on. So how can we reconcile those outside view of Guadeloupe and our personal feeling, memory, if you want to go? How can we reconcile? Or shall we not?
Good question.
I'm not so sure why you would want to reconcile the tourist advertisements with the reality.
No, it is not tourist, but you know why people come to Guadeloupe and all of them say, that's wonderful. And we come to Guadeloupe, we say, oh, how pitiful it is to be a Guadeloupean. So, I mean, we would like to find a way, a media between the people from the outside and the people from this side. Not the tourists, but I mean people, outsiders. If you go to Guadeloupe, you are not going to be a tourist. You are simply an outsider. An outsider.
Bruno has been working on correspondence lately, I believe, between Hannah Arendt and Heidegger, for example. You just taught a seminar on that. How does that, has there been any...
Yes, I've been working about philosophers' correspondence, and that's true. But it's a very difficult subject, especially if you try to do the link between memories and correspondence, because you know, when we read correspondence, we read something that in fact actually did not exist, because the book in which you are reading that never existed before the publisher decided to put together those letters, to select some of them, to put some others out of the book. For some reasons, they are very different. So this is a decision, and when you have 100, 1,000 letters, you have a kind of selection. Even if they say, at last, it's the complete correspondence, but you know that it is not absolutely that is not possible. And the first point is, if we try to do the link, to speak about selective memory. Selective memory. We have not said that word yet. I think it is very important, because the memory is always selective. There is, perhaps you know that you've read that a short story by Borges, how do you say? Borges. Yeah. The title of which is Funès ou la mémoire. Funès has got a kind of disease. He remembers absolutely everything. Absolutely everything. He can't forget anything. The least thing he cannot forget it. But he dies. He dies. He cannot live. You can't live if you don't select, if you don't choose some memories, you know. Yeah, that's the problem of the biography, of the autobiography too, you know.
But I think it's not just selection; it's distortion. I mean, you can't live unless you distort.
Selection is the distortion.
In some way, you know, it's easy to manufacture a memory that's extremely accurate. I mean, computers are very accurate in terms of you input it, it sits there, and it comes out in exactly the form that you input it. That's very much not like our memory. For some reason, and it's very hard to build our kind of memory if you're going to build it. Memory that distorts things so that it gives meaning, if you like, to your life. I mean, I think we would be imprisoned. We would not be able to live with ourselves if we remembered absolutely everything. We would be overwhelmed with all of these bad memories, all these good memories, and it would make it very inconsistent with our present attitude. And also socially. I mean, if we all had our own individual rendering of our initial individual rendering of past object, we would never. We living in a Rashomon film my entire life, in which everybody had different renderings of exactly the same thing, and there would be no social bonding between us. And so I think that it's not just selection. It's not that just we select. We distort in order to make ourselves comfortable with ourselves and ourselves comfortable with each other. And in my mind, rather than distortion being a bad thing and rather selection being a bad thing, it's exactly the opposite. God bless that we can do it.
But we're also talking as though a memory is a fixed entity.
Yes.
And what you remember at a certain moment is not how you remember it.
No, I think I'm saying just the opposite. It's not. It's constantly being renewed by your present.
Well, sorry, go ahead. Distortion in a certain way is necessary because that's the way we manage to control the emotions and the painful emotions. But once you talk about distortion, you are talking about an ongoing event, which means what you are distorting is also there.
It's a process.
Yeah.
No, but what you have distorted is there, has not disappeared. Psychoanalysis essentially works on the fact that you can remove certain distortions. You're never sure how much of it, but you can remove certain distortions and find something that is behind it that was not known. So it's not that we don't have all these memories. It's not that they've all been thrown away and cast away, no longer exist. Some of them continue to exist, in fact, to the degree that they're the ones that affect our behavior. Not the distorted thing
We're talking about the meaning of an event. We're talking about the meaning of a relationship.
or the memory of an event.
I'd like to throw a concrete example in here from Beckett's life that I think that everything that everyone has been saying relates in some way, but not completely, to what I found when I was writing the Beckett biography. I was just about finished with what I thought was going to be the published book, and I'd had 2 collections of letters. Beckett was he called it exile in Ireland, and he was writing letters at the time to a poet named Dennis Devlin and to another poet in London who was helping him to get published, George Reevey. Now, to Dennis Devlin, who was in Dublin, he presented a picture of such a happy man. I have pupils, I'm tutoring in French, I have an office in my father's building, I'm going to make my life here, everything is fine. To George McGreevy, it was, I really need to come back to London. I really need to get out of here, and please, please hurry up and get a book published so I'll have the money to do it. And so then he's writing to both of these people about how, well, Mother is giving me her blessing, and I'm going to go off and I'm going to live in Paris for a while, and everything is so marvelous and wonderful between me and Mother. And so I was going to publish this. And then, after years of trying, I was given access to the letters that he wrote to Thomas McGreevy, who was the only person, I think, I found in his life to whom he was completely honest. And he said things like, last night I was so drunk, I woke up lying in a gutter like a turkey with my mouth open and water coming in, and various people in Dublin picked me up and sent me home. And when I got home, I was so furious with my mother, it was 2 days before my brother's wedding, that I smashed all the crockery in the pantry, and I had to be the best man at my brother's wedding with my hands bandaged. And if I don't get out of Ireland soon, I'm going to have a nervous breakdown or I'm going to kill my mother. And within weeks after his brother's wedding, he was in Paris. Now, okay, the biographer's dilemma, what if I didn't have those letters? And I presented this happy vision of Mother sending him off to Paris, 36-year-old man, and she's patting him on the head like a child and telling him to go. What if I had only had that? And then what about the 3 different sets of memories that he chose to distribute among the people that he knew? Granted, of course, the degree of friendship or intimacy with these 3 different people had a great deal to do with what he chose to write. But you know, this
and you had to choose too.
Well, yeah.
You had to choose too.
But let me ask you, do you think that there is...
It's very important, your choice, and the choice of the publisher after you. It's so important, as much important as his choice. For us.
Let me ask you this
Excuse me.
No, please. I'm finished. You all talk now.
Ed said, but do you think there's a true memory there? That in the deep privacy of his bedroom, he has a true memory, and then he's just spinning little stories, or that if I go back to one of the great psychologists of memory, which is Frederick Bartlett. who says, there is no real memory. There is no memory to point at. It's all a reconstructive process that's built out of some potential to remember, and the actual is nothing is really stored away. So that because he's writing to one friend, this is what comes to mind. Lovely mother. Sometimes mothers are lovely. And then
Not Beckett's.
and he's writing to another friend who maybe he drank a lot with. So the drinking experience is probably important. And he's writing to another friend. And so each one, what springs to mind is not inauthentic in some sense. It's just tailored toward the audience in which he's writing. And it's as good and true as memory as the next one. It's just a different spin. Or is there some private memory deep down inside which he is then sort of spinning off these fairy tales from?
Well, I would like to comment on that just briefly. You have to distinguish distortion that is consciously done, purposely presenting yourself a certain way to a friend. So if you are looking for them to invite you to London, you may say, I'm so miserable here, can you? That's not the kind of distortion we are talking about. We are talking about distortion that you are not aware that you have distorted or are distorting. As regards to what you found, which sounds more his own feelings about what was happening here,
But he was
if he said, which would fall more into what you describe as explicit episodic memory, I remember Tuesday at 5 o'clock in the morning, December 11th, I woke up in the gutter. Then you would know that that memory is most likely going to be distorted. If he repeatedly woke up in the gutter, and he said, I wake up in the gutter most of the time, then that would probably not be that distorted. That would be more falling to what is called implicit or semantic memory, which would be description of events like we all do. We say, I remember I went to France in October. That's a fact. But what I did when I arrived there at a particular moment, that's much more liable to be distorted.
I think when you're going to talk about Beckett, also, you have to remember that he was extraordinarily ambivalent about his mother. There was never a good feeling or a bad... Well, luckily not quite as much as he was. And I really think that played a very significant role in his correspondence and how he described his relationship to his mother. And
the only person to whom he spoke in a negative way, in any way, was McGreevy.
No, he also spoke to Jim Knowlson negatively about his mother.
Well, that was a long time after.
It was much later,
It was after
but
my
he
book
did.
was published.
And he said, yes. It's true.
So you have to redo it now.
No. I mean, there were a lot of things that he said to Jim Knowlson that were directly in response to my book.
Well, I don't know how far you want to take this.
He said it, yeah, sure.
Okay,
yeah.
well, I think...
all of us, we noticed that they had said the truth is when you say you are going to kill your mother and when you are drunk. that you say the truth when you are in that state.
Can I ask?
Sure.
Do you think that the whole term memory distortion is somehow wrong? Because it assumes that there is a memory that then gets distorted.
Right, yes.
Whereas, it may be that we just have memories, that some of which, if a biographer comes along and goes and checks it, they turn out to be completely wrong, self-serving, and all sorts of things. And some level they're distortions, but they're probably really good memories as well.
Well, you're actually asking if all memory is misremembering.
Well, yes, and
right?
you had asked that question too. Is there any memory that's not somehow imagination?
All autobiographic memory we are talking about, because there are other memories that are not.
Of course.
Only autobiographic memory, that question would come up. I don't know if the answer can be known. Freud felt differently. Freud thought that you kept the traces.
Yes, I know this.
Yeah, so it was one on top of the other on top. Whether it's so or not, I don't know. But certainly in the analytic situation, you find out other things behind other distortions. But at what point you stop and say that's it?
Well, is it like an onion? Once you peel it away, there's nothing there.
Mm-hmm.
But are there other kinds of memory besides autobiographical? The person who was at Hiroshima or Pearl Harbor, or I'm thinking, PBS War is in my mind these days, so I bring up historical memories. The person who was there has a particular sliver of the event, because the memory is both historical and autobiographical, and we write history, we base history on so much that is autobiographical. Even historians of the Roman Empire, who believed that they were writing true histories of the Caesars, brought a personal interpretation to it. So, I don't know if this is a valid remark or not, but it seems...
I would like to say something.
Yes.
You say that memory should not be... All memories are distorted. But it seems to me that the speciality of collective memory is to try not to be distorted. Individual memory can be distorted. Yes, it's bound to be distorted. But the collective memory has to be right. Otherwise,
Why do you say that?
It seems to me, because if we go on believing as a group in some lies, it affects the society we belong to. So the effort that we are trying to make all the time is to put things right as far as the collectivity is concerned. So collective memory should not be full of fantasy, full of distortion, should be right. It seems to be.
Should be. Whether they are, it's another issue.
No,
Yes.
but should be. It seems, in order to allow the individual memory to be as it is, we need the collective memory to be right. It seems to me.
This is your faith.
My case.
We also have to remember that when Maryse is talking about memory, she's talking about her own experience of her subjective experience of something that happened in her past. When Deirdre or Bruno is talking about writing about the memory of somebody else, it's passing through somebody else's mind, and it has to have some kind of distortion to some degree by the mere fact that it's coming through your mind and not through directly from the person who experienced it.
Yes, because I'm selecting.
Right. So it's a selective
as a historian,
memory.
as a scholar of comparative literature.
It's memory by proxy.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I think the claim
But
is
it's based
even
on
for
fact.
individual
It has to be
memories,
based on fact. In other words, the biographer has to be the artist under oath. That's Desmond McCarthy's wonderful phrase. The biographer cannot tell you anything unless it's true. I've just finished reading Diane Ackerman's marvelous book, The Zookeeper's Daughter. And this woman constructs a story that is absolutely glorious to read, and everything she says is based on a document, based on an archive, based on a journal.
But there again, you're making
there's
a
a story
distinction between historical fact
Yes.
and the idea of truth in memory,
Yes.
which I think Ed has articulated that doesn't exist as such. I mean, it's...
Well, I'm not so sure if two people. Sorry.
Didn't Janet Malcolm deal with this a lot in her her essays about biography,
Yes.
autobiography, the relationship between the
Yes.
autobiographer and not to interrupt, but
No, you're right. You're right.
I'm not so sure if two different writers with exactly the same facts would write the same
Oh,
book.
I'm certain that they wouldn't.
Oh,
So
exactly.
therefore, there is some other, there is a, if you want to call it distortion, that is imposed on the facts by the person who's writing
The
them.
mere fact of having chosen a particular writer to write about is important as well. I mean, why did you choose to do a biography of Beckett or Jung or anybody else as opposed to some other? And it's also interesting, I would at some point, I know that both of you want to say something, but I read recently that you like to write biographies of, actually, you haven't necessarily done so, but that you prefer to write about living authors rather than, and I'd love to hear about that in a minute, but I think before we get on to something new, yes, please, go ahead.
No,
Bruno.
we're talking about the distortion. We seem, all of us, think that the distortion is not volunteer when it is, but perhaps sometimes it is. And that's my answer to what you said too, this is a political question.
Yes.
What you said, this is a political question, because the memory of a people, of a collective memory, they can be transformed, they can be changed, they can be manipulated, you say that? By political power.
Yes.
That's a point, very important. And that's a distortion, a real one.
And not always intentional. Sometimes our collective memories are unintentional.
Yes,
distorted.
absolutely.
It doesn't have to always be some authority imposing down upon
But
it.
don't you think that,
same thing about
don't you think
biography.
that it is only if collective memory is not distorted that individual memory can be free to go, distort, change, improve, metamorphose. It seems to me that once collective memory has become something sure, definite, we can trust, we can allow ourselves as an individual to be totally free. But we cannot before.
I'm not so sure you can ever reach your ideal, and that gets Bruno said this earlier. I mean, when you essentially consult these cultural artifacts in order to check the facts. Well, the cultural artifacts are as much manipulated as anything else. We decide when, in American history, at some points the archives didn't exist at all, and at other points they were very underfunded, and so the amount of documents that were collected varies at various points in American history. So this budgetary consideration has a huge impact on our ability to construct a collective memory. And it's also true for autobiographical memory, that I decide to put a picture on my wall will have an immense impact on how I remember my past, because I will look at that picture of a friend and suddenly every time I look at it, these certain memories will come to mind. Where if I didn't, because there's not enough wall space, or I don't know why, don't put that picture on the wall, suddenly my whole autobiography has changed. In the same way, if you build a memorial, if you don't fund the archives, or if you overfund the archives, you create a certain collective memory that has it. If development comes to Guadalupe and they knock down all of those sugarcane fields, you've lost either a positive or a negative or a cultural artifact, and it's there, and it's going to shape your memory, like it or not. It's going to shape your memory.
Bruno has, for the first time, said a word that I think has been underlying almost everything that any of us have said here today, and he used the word political. And I think that that's an important aspect to bring into our discussion.
Very important. And you know, it depends. For you, politics matters are important. But for somebody like me, political matters are essential. I'm more a political subject than any of you, because I'm involved in fighting to keep myself entire sane in front of a political body, political institution. So it seems to me that politics is not important, is not equally important for everybody. For people of my part of the world, of my nationality, if we can call it nationality, it is more important than for you. I don't even know if I have a nationality. I'm supposed to be French. Is that true?
I can't really comment on the political thing because I have no expertise or knowledge except having witnessed the recent issue about Armenians and the genocide and how it kept going back and forth depending on political needs, and gave rise to some comments from prominent people that were in essence kind of stupid, because one of them, I think it's Representative Morta, said, I think everybody acknowledges between a few 100,000 and 1 million Armenians died at that point. But Morta says, well, it's not clear whether it was a massacre or a genocide. So if 500,000 people died as a massacre, it's okay. If they died as a genocide, that's terrible. So we can't vote on it because it's not. So, but that's, you know, I don't know what to do with that in terms of what we are talking about. But I want to go back to this idea of our memories completely non-existent and give a clinical example so that, at least for me, it has more conviction. This man tells in his treatment that he went to college, drove to college, and 2 days later had a phone call that his father had died. During the work of the analysis, he starts revising that story and comes to the conclusion that, in fact, he had a fight with his father before he left. And then 2 days later, he got a phone call that his father died. As the work keeps going, he comes up with a new version, which is he fought with his father, got in his car, got to college. By the time he got to school, he had a phone call that his father had died. So we worked on that and the distortions about that in terms of whatever relationship and feelings and ambivalence he had towards his father to understand better that relationship. As a consequence of this, he had been telling me a story which he remembered, which we in psychoanalysis call screen memories. That is, these are kind of, as Phyllis Greenacre called them, islands of recollection from childhood. So it's a specific, well-delineated memory that you have from your childhood. So his memory was he went home and the dog, and his father wasn't home, and his mother said, your father has gone looking for the dog who has escaped. And the father comes back without his dog, the boy's dog, that we can't find the dog, he has escaped. Following the work on the college trip, he remembers that, in fact, it may well be that his father didn't go after a lost dog, but that there had been talk that the dog was sick and he put the dog to sleep. Went to his mother, now as an adult, the mother is still alive, and asked her, and that was the true fact, that the father had taken. So they, somewhere in the mind, exist. If that answers your question, I don't know.
Anyone want to respond to that?
Yeah. But because it depends. What do you think important? What does really matter to you? The true fact, as you just said, it doesn't matter for you.
That is better is what matters to me.
Yeah. So what is important is what your patient did with all that. I mean, the creation. That's the first word of the roundtable. The word Lois used. Memory is creative, and you hope that your patients will be creative with their memories, because only finding or the true fact is not so important for them.
No.
Is it?
Well, whether it's the true fact or not, the fact that will help the fact that will help unravel certain conflicts is important.
Yeah.
That's what's important.
Yeah.
In terms of the question, I don't know whether you meant creative in the sense of creating art, or you meant just creative in the sense that memories are created.
I meant in the second sense, but now I'd like to ask in the first sense, and then we'll open it up to the audience. How can memory help us to be more creative as artists?
More creative than artists?
As artists.
As artists.
As artists.
How can memory serve us to free our creativity and to, certainly in your case,
Individual or collective?
either
I cannot read that.
individual?
Individual. But you know, it seems to me that writing is using memory all the time. I don't see any difference between writing and making use of my memory. Either it is fabricated distorted or pure. I don't think there is anything like a pure memory.
So there's no such thing either as creating something completely new that doesn't have some element of...
It is already there.
Right.
It seems to me.
Maybe we'll open this up to the audience. Questions? Hallie.
Just employed to get closer to photographing. I just want to ask the panelists or anybody to think about memory in terms of nonverbal memory, and whether there are ways in which our memory is not just verbal, because we talked about the picture that gives, but it seems always in this panel to be giving rise to language, and I was wondering if you could talk about that.
That's a very
talk
good
about
point.
procedural memory?
No, I don't know. Clearly, there's a bias because that's what most of us are dealing with, verbal memories. We look at letters, we look at what people say, but people draw, people express their memories in a variety of ways. I suspect the process is a little bit different, but it's but it's it involves similar mechanisms, if you like.
Did you want to say?
Go ahead, Bruno.
Lois, you have spoken about the body, about the memories in of the body, by the body.
Body memory.
Proust
Tennis
speaks.
players use it.
I'm sorry?
Tennis players.
Dancers
Tennis
use it.
players.
I mean, there's
Yes,
no
of
such thing
course.
as the body forgetting.
Yeah, and a piano player too.
Yes,
Player too.
But I want to relate body memory to distortion again and get back to my favorite psychologist of memory, which is Bartlett. And when he argued that memory was reconstructive, that there was no memory there, it was all. In fact, he thought the whole problem was he doesn't express it this way, but the field was using nouns too much. They should use verbs. He called his book Remembering, and you should talk about the verb of what you do rather than this thing, this entity. But what he said that when you remember something explicitly, whether it's like say something verbally or draw it or whatever, he said that it was this reconstructive process in the same way as a motor activity is a reconstructive process. He said it made no sense to him if you think about a tennis player swinging his tennis racket. It makes no sense that they have stored away billions of possible tennis strokes and then they retrieve some particular memory of a tennis stroke and then fulfill that. Rather, it literally grows out of the situation, whether you were drinking the night before, whether you were in the gutter the night before, whether you hate your opponent or like your opponent, where the position of the sun is, plus all your past experiences of playing tennis. All of that comes to bear, both the present and the past, to create on the run that stroke. And he said that your explicit memories, your autobiographical memories, and your collective memories and the like were of the same kind.
But where are the past experiences?
Playing tennis.
But what's happened
Well,
to them?
his term was that you had a schema, and the schemas were the organized representation of your past. But it was not as if you could point to anything which was this, the tennis stroke that I made October 4th. Each point, each experience is integrated into it, and it becomes a potential.
Essentially,
Let me ask you a question then. Are you saying that there has to be a cognitive element in it? There's no such thing as a muscular memory. There's no such thing as a familiarity within the body that recognizes.
There's procedural memory, which has to do with memory of
but it has to do with.
So if
you know how to ride a bicycle, you always know how to ride a bicycle. Or playing tennis.
But whether you call it schema, whether you call it memory, I don't know what the difference is. It is recorded someplace and exists in some form in the central nervous system. It's not being created de novo, otherwise you wouldn't be able to play tennis because you wouldn't know how to play it.
Right.
First. Oh, well, I, one point on the body memory before I ask my question is if you take a baseball player, I mean, if he doesn't play for 5 days, his memory is not the same as it is when he's playing every day. The body forgets. The timing isn't as good, so that the memory is something it's very detailed in terms of such things, so that the memory is not always equal, you know. Now, the question is about distortion. In a sense, isn't that maybe not a good word? Because, for example, memory is something that you, as Mr. Hirst said, you know, the present, if you work on your memory and you try to find, it's the interpretation that counts. In other words, if I'm looking at something back a long time ago, I really don't see it right unless I try to interpret it and look at it a lot of times, as the writer does, revising and revising and revising until they get exactly what they want. It seems to me that distortion, that word should sort of be changed, because distortion means to say that I don't know what the word is. It's not the distortion, you just can't remember it right. Memory in general is it's an error unless you work on it, so you can get it better. And it's not the memory that's important, it's getting to the truth. And the memory helps you get to the truth when you work on it.
I
Is that
think
true?
memory is tendentious, essentially. You don't like distortion. I say memory is tendentious.
And what does that mean?
Means you alter it according to certain needs that you have.
Okay.
But then if you're saying you alter it, there's that it. So you run into the same problem again. But, I mean, of course, we agree with you. I mean, there's no other way to think of it, but we can't get away from that essence, as though there's something there that we are. I understand what you're saying.
You can alter something with that thing no longer being there. I mean, if I alter a sculpture and go boom, 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 and alter it, the previous sculpture's gone.
Right, and the new one would be on the new one.
This is true. Yes, yes.
Well, just a top-of-the-head lay opinion, which goes really back to what Professor Hirst said, and I think to some extent addresses what the last questioner said, is that I really believe that we really ought to talk about memory as memory and drop anything about distortion or truth. That a memory is, and I think in a way it's helpful to begin there from any perspective, psychoanalytic, historical, philosophical, what have you. But that's my comment. But to go to Ed's last comment, which I think was the last before we open it up to questions, when you talked about from a psychoanalytic point of view, what's important, and you use the word, is the fact which enables the resolution of conflict. And again, to some extent based on what I just said, how strongly do you believe that what you're talking about is a fact or some psychological readjustment in some sense, irrespective of what the facts were, that will enable that psychological healing to take place?
Yeah. You want to call readjustment, I'm fine with it. I mean, I don't see...
No, but I guess what I'm pointing at is that from the standpoint of a psychoanalyst, to what extent the fact is important, or to what extent the memory that... And I agree with you when you... Well, obviously what you said, it was sort of the basic Freudian concept that even though your memories can change over time, the tracks are always there.
What was important about the patient I gave the example is the recognition of his intense, ambivalent relationship to his father. Whether the dog got lost or was put to sleep or sent to Mars, from a psychoanalytic point of view, it's irrelevant, but that there was an alteration under which hid a whole other set of things having to do with his relationship with his father. That's what was important.
Okay,
so which one is fact, you choose it.
But what you're really talking about is what you reach the deeper emotional truth about how he felt. And that emotional truth, in a way, supersedes what the actual facts might be.
But contains within it experiences.
Yes, without question.
Yeah.
Right.
Readjustment.
Bruno.
Yes, I just want to thank you for the word readjustment, because I have looked for that word even when preparing that, and I think really it's exactly the right word. And I think that the question between you two is readjustment or fact. But I think that, if I understand quite well, that readjustment becomes a fact at the end of it.
Right,
Okay.
that's true.
Yeah.
Two issues. One, it seemed like when we were talking about body memory, we got stuck back in procedural memory in terms of like bicycle riding and tennis and all of that. But I'm thinking about the ways that gestures and the way we carry ourselves are often linked to whether it's a specific language or culture or period in our life. And that often when we go back to that place or we speak that language, our whole self-experience can change. And I don't know whether that's an area that gets distorted in the same sense. Do we believe that that's more accurate? I don't know if there's been, I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say, but it does seem to me like that's another quality of body memory that's very different than learning to play something. The other question, sort of issue that I had was that I know, Deirdre, you sort of almost specialized, and maybe all people have this in their biographies, but so many of the people you've written about have deliberate different stories of themselves that they tell while their life is happening. And then at some point perhaps start to believe those stories. So Anais had several different versions of her biography, and then she had her image, which she was maintaining, and certainly the image that many people, you know, how people thought of her, and the same with de Beauvoir, I think. And then to what extent do they then, quote, remember the version of themselves that they like? And I think Bill's done research, though, about how telling stories, like the way families tell stories, will then affect the memory of the people in the family. And so it's a sort of individual version, then, of a kind of constant repeating of a version of ourselves.
Yes. Yeah.
But that it started often with a deliberate distortion.
Yeah.
Just a comment about that, the second question. I remember when I hear that, a kind of tool that was made by Sartre, trying to say something, and he said a lot of things, about Flaubert, 3,000 pages, unfinished.
Yes.
Unfinished.
Yes.
A model for you. So the tool, the name of the tool is a little bit complicated, but very important for us, I think. Regressive progressive method.
Right.
So what does that mean? Very simple, in fact. And about the multiple versions of the biography, you must have a look behind you. That the regressive moment of the method to establish or try to establish some facts. But you can't, this is not sufficient. You must go ahead and readjust at every moment of your life. So do you, and you must go, what are the Beckettian va-et-vient?
Come and go.
Come and go, come and go. We must come and go between regressive moment, progressive moment, regressive moment, progressive moment, and that's a life. And that is distortions, permanent distortion or readjustment. I prefer really readjustment of memory.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yes.
Yeah, that you can use those words. I was very struck that only once in this discussion, and an hour into it, Maryse Conde used the word lie. And then that word came up very momentarily and then disappeared. And I feel like the process of memory that we're discussing here can really change depending on what kind of thing it is you're remembering. When you brought up the whole two versions of Guadeloupe, it reminded me 35 years ago I went to Guadeloupe as a tourist, and my memory of it is how beautiful it was. The sea was beautiful, wonderful wildlife. It was terrific. And then when you raised that question, I remembered from the airport to the resort, you could see horrible things. You saw the sugar cane fields. You saw people living in terrible poverty. And the whole week that I was there, which I had forgotten until you brought it up, I would see local people working in the resort. There would be these huge spreads of buffets, and I felt terrible every day, thinking, what are these people thinking? All this food being served and wasted. But both of them are true. The French version of Guadeloupe is true. It is a beautiful place, but it also is a probably terrible place to live if you were born there. In general, and that's the kind of thing. Those kind of things can both be true. But then I was thinking of what you said, Deirdre Bair, about Steinberg. He either went back to Romania or he didn't. That's the kind of thing where it's not like both versions can be true. I think only one of them can be true for that kind of fact. The same thing, Günter Grass either was in the Waffen-SS or he wasn't. There are some things I think that we have to say that people can actually lie about, and that's different than memory distortion. We don't always know. There is a question, I think it's true, that people may not know themselves sometimes, but I don't know if you think that Steinberg didn't know.
Don't know it, Mark? Is it a lie?
No, it was pre-Photoshop, so he had to have gone.
Yeah, but Mark, if you don't know it, if you don't remember it, is it a lie?
Right, but then there's the question, did he not remember it, or was he lying?
I don't know. That's the same as, what's his name, Will Kaminsky, I mean, who remembers an entire childhood of being in a concentration camp, and yet documents show he could not have been. He was in Sweden. He's Swiss. He's Swiss, yeah. So there, it's not just even 1 week, it's a whole childhood. And it's just simply not clear whether he's lying, which means he knows the truth and he's not telling you. He has distinct memories. Or he believes it, which I would say, if he believes it, he has a valid memory. Yeah. It just happens not to be a
I'm sure that many of our memories are what we've been told by our parents or siblings of things that never happened.
Well, in his case, he came to recover those memories later in life.
Right, but I'm just saying there are a number of things that we've been told by those in our family that are their memories, which are not our memories and are not accurate memories because they're their distortions.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure it's a lie.
Well, but there's a continuum, I think, that we're talking about of, it's now called truthiness.
I think we need to go on to the question behind.
Yes, it's actually a different tack. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. Could we let her finish and then we'll go to you? Sorry, yes.
As someone who studies memory and literature and has studied Proustian memory a lot also, I think there is a notion that might be helpful here, which we touched upon, but we didn't go into deeply enough. And I think the notion is important because it helps us distinguish between personal memory and collective memory. And it also brings us back to the whole question of art and memory and the aesthetic dimensions of memory. Oliver Sacks, who thinks in terms of Proustian memory when he works with some of his amnesiac patients, says somewhere that for him remembering is scenic and melodic. And I think what we need to understand is that for the person remembering, for the person involved in remembering, the rememberer, there are qualitative dimensions to the act of remembering. There are modes of emphasis. There are ways in which the memory picture, which travels from the body into a place of consciousness, is inflected with points of vividness, with points of emphasis, with a richness in the representation that is part of the validation of the memory for the subjective rememberer. For example, in screen memory, it's very clear that Freud recognizes in the intensity of certain images that his alter ego presents signs that there might be more investment in that element in the picture that might bring us closer to a truth, just closer to a truth. But the advantage of thinking of memory in qualitative terms is to get away from the binarism of distortion or of lie and to recognize that to any creation that is a memory, and that's very Proustian in a way, you recognize the elements of an aesthetic gesture that invests in that picture.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, this is an improvisation. I love complexity, And I feel like I'm in the lap of life in this discussion. The next part of the improvisation, there's an image in my mind of people of different heights standing in water and having a discussion of who's dry. And that's part of the complexity of what's happening with this. Now, the next part, I want to set out something about where I'm at and why I love this discussion. I think it's the crossroads of postmodernism, ways of liberation such as Buddhism, and for autobiography and those issues. Always already is the phrase that by the time we're reflective, if it's want to talk about as memory or narrative, we're always already embedded in some ways. And there's no way out of that. We're embedded in language, we're embedded in personal history, we're embedded in body, as we've been referring to it. And maybe, we're not aware of the significant range of that even if we look at films from different cultures. The ways people move their bodies can be culturally influenced. So we're always already embedded by the time we become reflective, which I think is the postmodern statement. We're always in narrative. And part of, again, the idea of being embedded in water and talking about who's dry is there's a politics in this which came out of the postmodern discussion, that people are going to speak of this already politically influenced in terms of their investment, in terms of meaning, in terms of the interaction, and emotionally in terms of fear, insecurity, or confidence, because self is challenged when we see life as already an influenced narrative. And some of us may be more or less ready to look at our narrative and accept its limitations over against the absolute. We know we're in a culture of absolute when we have people taking the kinds of positions that we're confronted with today.
Thank you. I think we've
I want to add one more thing, please. The other aspect which is absent but I think is very present is in the ways of liberation, in the uses of meditation, is a totally different cultural approach to these experiences, and is a non-narrative approach, finally, I believe. That is, people are coming to a sense of peace or a different sense of resolution through that, which, in terms of some of what you say as a psychoanalyst, raises questions of, are there prejudices in your approach to what you think is making someone better? That are real issues, in terms of what's going on. So I don't know if this is going to provoke anything from the people here, but I think these are modern contemporary issues regarding self and identity that can be very disturbing and frightening or very liberating, and face us with options as to where we go with this or don't go with this.
Thank you. Ed, do you want to respond?
Pass.
Okay. Does anyone want to respond to any of that? Okay. Yes, but could you just wait till this woman was waiting before you? Thank you.
To get back to, I think, a comment that somebody made in the very beginning to Proust, is there any such thing as memory, or are we always searching for lost times? And therefore, what is true memory? Is there any such thing as true memory? I noted to myself that one word that had not been used is emotional memory. Is emotional memory true memory? Is it less true memory? And also, to get back to Greenacre's comment, Islands of Recollection from Childhood, cognition. A child's early memories are continually reformed through life because the child is not capable of that memory fragment making sense of a memory fragment, so it has to get distorted. And then it gets built on as cognition develops, as family stories feed into that, and also, for many people, history. As history impacts upon that memory, and then it takes on a new and more powerful and very different form.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mark Kogi.
Yes.
I've recently been reading a book called Follies of the Wise by Frederick Cruz, in which he places the blame for the creation of false memories in psychoanalysis on Freud's theory of repression. And I wanted to know, to what extent does the panel think that the creation of false memories in psychoanalysis are responsible? Or to what extent is Freud's theory of repression responsible for the creation of false memories in psychoanalysis?
Connection between repression and false memory.
I'm not so sure what is it you mean by false memories. If by false memories you mean the kind of thing that happened back 15 years ago, where suddenly everybody had incest and their parents abused them and their fathers or their mother did that or that.
Yes, that's what he's referring to in the book, yes.
Well, that came up because somebody before Cruz was criticizing Freud for saying the memories, many of those memories were fantasy. So Freud was criticized for saying they were fantasy, and now he's being criticized for saying that he is responsible for these ones that are supposed to have been accurate memories and now later have become false memories. So, Freud, you can criticize him any way you like. There's always plenty there.
Thank you.
Yes.
This is a question about different kinds of collective memory that I thought of.
Could you speak a little louder?
This is a question about different kinds of collective memory that I thought of actually when you raised the question of families that tell stories and plant memories. So there's the collective memory of a little group like a family. But I thought everybody would have something to say this because, of course, those of you who write on artists and writers and intellectuals have another kind of memory of their forebears, right? I mean, certainly the surrealists under Breton would create genealogies of people who lived for several hundred years beforehand. These are kind of collective, another kind of collective memory, and I thought everybody would have something to say about how the memories of others become already distorted over time, and generations become readjusted yet again, and I thought you might each have something to say about that.
Anybody like to comment?
Nietzsche is absolutely a good example for that. Yes, that's true. Nietzsche has written two versions of his genealogy in Ecce Homo. We have found, perhaps 20 years or 30 years ago, the second version saying exactly the opposite of the first one, which was published. This is very interesting. And it's a philosopher. And the book is a book of philosophy, Ecce Homo. So.
Did I misunderstand, or did one of the panels say you first have to have the memory, and then you first have to have the memory, and then you distort it? As a psychologist, I don't think that's true. I think your recall itself is a process of distorting. That's it.
I think that's actually what we've been playing with here for the past. Yes.
So what I brought with me here is something nobody has ever seen before, and I've kept up in our sweater, and that is, and no one in this room has ever seen this before, and it's a memory. Memory is obviously, no one of us have ever seen a memory. Memories are personal experiences. All we ever see is a token expression of a memory. All we can ever measure is a person's expression of their memory, but we can never see a memory. We only see things. And I think much of what we're talking about really should not be referred to memory, but to memory tokens, to particular expressions of memory. I don't think we can make generalizations about memory because it's irreducibly personal, and all we get is sentences and propositions that come out of memory.
Let me ask you this. If you can never see it, you can never point at it, you can never feel it, you can never be in any way, shape, or form verify its existence, why assume it exists? Why assume it exists?
Well,
maybe it is. The tokens, what you're saying are tokens of memories, are the memories, and there's no memory there except those tokens, if you like.
I have no problem with that. I'm simply saying that when we talk about this, we are talking about memory actually as if it's reified, and I think it only exists in these. It only exists in
the same thing. Different. You'll know it just like if you look at a microscope, you can't see germs, but they're there.
Yeah, but eventually you find
germs aren't irreducibly unseeable. You can find better and better instruments. Memories are irreducibly unseeable.
Yeah, that's
okay. Another question.
First of all, I have to make a comment about that. With someone who has some training in neuroscience, I'm not sure that's technically true from a neuroscientist's point of view. But that's not what I want to ask about. My question's directed primarily to Dr. Hirst, and that is what categories do we put emotional memory in? And do you recognize emotional memory? And I'm talking from a technical, we've got a brain that is a physical thing that the neuroscientists study, and they can see activity happening in it. And so what can you tell us about what we know about the physics of emotional memory? Physics, I mean the organic, there's a tangible thing.
Of course there's emotional memory. We all have memories of emotion. I suspect actually someone asked previously whether they're, how reliable they are. I suspect they're less reliable than memories for facts, for instance. I'm pretty sure that the square root of 2 is 1.414 approximately. I'm pretty sure of that, but I'm less sure what I was thinking about when I was 17 years old and dating somebody. I'm not so sure my memory of that is very reliable.
I'm not sure she means by emotional memory of emotion.
No, I mean more about the sense of yourself and how you feel about yourself when things happen in the world and the expectations you have of yourself, and you experience.
Well, I would break that down into much finer categories. What I think about myself takes verbal form, it takes emotional form, it takes body form, it takes endless numbers of forms. So I would want to break that down into smaller categories.
Well, that's actually exactly what I'm asking.
Yeah.
From your point of view, sort of what are those categories? Isn't it to educate us? Basically, to educate us.
There's cognitive, there's sensory.
Yeah, but from my viewpoint, I'd have to show that they are all, you can map them onto different brain structures and the like, and I'm not sure where the science is quite there yet. Clearly, if I talked about emotional memory, it seems to be mediated through the amygdala, and that's unique to emotion memory. Whether that's true of all sorts of affect, whether that's true of sensory memories, probably break up into different kinds of sensory systems. So it's a huge question.
It's a big question. I realize it's a big question, but I thought it was at least worth us acknowledging in this discussion. Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks. There was a question asked earlier that didn't really get answered in my mind, and that was, if I can recall slightly, it was something like, how can memory help us be more creative as artists? Mm-hmm. I was very surprised that didn't get much of an answer, because that's very much what I am in the process of studying and writing about right now. And it seems to me that to the extent that memories are, as one of the gentlemen earlier mentioned, a reflection of how we process recollections of whatever type, and some of the things that I've been reading and studying about in terms of neuropsychology is that we take in information and knowledge, and we maintain it, and our sense of reality, if you will, our sense of that which exists, the models that we understand in the world, the physical attributes that certain elements of our world have that we know, we associate those memories with things that we understand and that we can process and that we can make sense of. And so to the extent that our memories are reflections of our sense of these models in our world, then memories, from my perspective, are simply just an asset that we can utilize to call upon and make associations with other things, one degree of separation away. And that is just the basic level of creativity, is you take something that you understand, you take something that you've seen, and you associate it analogously with something else that is a foundation of your reasoning. And once that memory has a certain level of perception, then you can call upon any one of those memories and perhaps tweak it a little bit. And there you have something new. There's creation. There's creativity. That's just, if there's a comment on that.
I'll make one response, and that was when you responded to that question. What you said, if I remember correctly, is you're right. And I suspect, as in any creative process, most of the time, even when I'm telling someone a story about the past, I'm not aware that I'm really remembering. It's not like you sit there and you stop and say, now I'm going to remember this, and then you remember. You just talk and memories come out. You just write and memories come out. And I suspect that I know nothing about the creative process, but I suspect it's the same way. I mean, maybe some people do voluntarily, intentionally call upon their memories, but I suspect that in most of the time that you don't even know you're relying upon your memories, and yet they shape in a profound way everything that you do. And I suspect when you just write, you may not be aware that you are actively working to retrieve the past. But there it is. When you go back and you look at it, or some critic looks at it, you say, there it is. And I suspect a lot of the creative process is like that.
For each of us, our memory is our sense of reality. So every new memory increases our perception of reality.
I think Ed had one comment.
Well, Francis writes a poem a day, so he could tell us whether he has what role his memories play in that creative act.
Which we tell what?
You write a poem, one poem every day. So what
role does memory have in that process for you?
Use the microphone.
Can I think about that?
Yes, you can. One last question.
This conversation reminds me of Will Rogers' statement that things aren't what they used to be and never were. Just on the very nature of memory, I think that in science we're stuck very much with a similar problem when we talk about energy, where we can talk about all the manifestations of energy, but we can't actually say, nobody can actually say what energy is, only its expressions. And memory, I think, is, to my mind, is filtered via our perceptions and our needs, and then limited by our capacity to express our internal experience.
Well, on that very articulate comment, thank you.